Welcome back to the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Wednesday host, Yeka, and this week we have been talking about stars and planets and what those mean in our practices, specifically the sun and the moon. So, I want to start this right off the bat by saying that personally I am passionate about astronomy. I have pretty much no interest whatsoever in astrology. Don't care if other people do or have practiced that or learn about it. Just doesn't float my boat. But astronomy is something that I'm very interested in. And actually, my master's is in planetary science. So my undergraduate is in agricultural ecology and also in range ecology. And when I did my master's, I very much viewed that as a continuation. So instead of looking at it, coming at it from a physics background or an engineering background, although I have experience in those areas, I really came at it from the perspective of looking at planets and planetary systems as ecology, as resource cycling, and that sort of thing. So, from an intellectual place, thinking about an awareness about other planets, about the cosmos, is very intellectually feeding. But on a spiritual, on a practice level, it's also very important and very feeding to me, and it ties into one of my main practices. And the main practice that we talked about recently was grounding, but this one is what I call sun time and star time. And yes, I recognize that the sun is a star, but basically to distinguish between night and day. And what I do is I try to make sure, and I'm usually pretty good about it, taking a little bit of time every single day to go outside and be in the sun and be present and ground during that period and have some awareness of that. Likewise, nightly, to every night go and have some star time, some time under the stars, looking, watching the night sky, but also the night environment and how different the same place is when it's night than when it's day, and looking at who, in terms of what animals and are active during that time period and what kind of activity, and just how the flow of energy in the ecosystem is different depending on whether it's night or day. So in terms of the where planets are relative to us in the sky, for instance, that's something that I usually am very aware of because I enjoy going out and watching them and thinking about them. And astronomy is something very interesting to me. I'd love in the future to get a little bit deeper into it. At the moment, I've just got a little 70 mil, so I can make out, rings of Saturn and, the Galilean moons and that kind of detail, but nothing really spectacular. I mean, it can resolve quite a bit, but it's nothing like getting into some of the more advanced telescopes. And personally, I'm very interested in radio astronomy and would love to get deeper into that at some point. But for right now, just my eyes, just my body, and experiencing and looking at and thinking about the cosmos, thinking about our solar system, thinking about the galaxy that we're part of as an extension of nature, because it is, right? And it's part of the ecosystem, it's part of the environment that we are part of. And I keep saying ecosystem, and I know that there's debate on whether other things are alive outside of off of our planet, which for me, we don't have evidence of that, but it would be just looking at the numbers, I think it would be astronomically unlikely that there isn't other life. But whether there's life or not, those systems still cycle resources and cycle energy in the same ways that we see here on our planet in just this very, very small environment. So understanding as an expansion of this and that it is an environment that I am very much part of, that we are very much part of. And in the same way that I would want to sit and be present with a river, or sit and be present with a forest, in practice, I find it helpful to sit and be present with the rest of the solar system. So that time underneath the stars is really critical and feeding for me. And let's see here, talking about specifically thinking about the sun and the moon in my path or my practice. I don't prescribe a specific innate meaning to the sun or the moon or any body like that. To me, it's a place, and it's a place that we as Earth have a relationship with. So the sun is, the relationship that we have with the sun is what gives us the seasons. And the wheel of the year is also very central for me and very important. So that relationship with the sun is is very critical. Now, I want to say that actually thinking about the sun and our relationship to it is very similar to the way that I think about magic often, because it isn't that the sun is doing the seasons to us, right? The sun isn't. The sun doesn't actually hold still, or it doesn't actually set or rise, but we perceive it that way because of the way we are moving around in relationship to it. And of course, there are some things, the sun does have a cycle of its own, an 11 or 22-year cycle, depending on how you look at it, of its activity, and we're only just starting to learn how that can influence our planet. But anyways, talking about just the relationship of our tilt, where we are in our orbit relative to it and how much energy different parts of the surface are receiving at once, has to do with that, the relationship between the two entities. And when you change, if the Earth was to change its tilt, right, which it does very, very, very slowly. It's not like it's tilting back and forth every season. No, it's in a specific tilt, and it moves around, and over a very, very long period it will change its tilt. But if it were to suddenly do so, the way that the sun would influence and back to the planet and how we would experience it would change drastically. And that's kind of what I think about in terms of what we're often doing with magic, changing ourselves, changing the way that we are relating towards something else, whether that's the world, whether that's us, whether that's, money, whatever the magic was that we were working on. Even if we're not physically changing the other, we're changing our relationship to it. And the way that that responds, the way it interacts, is what changes, and our experience of it changes. So that's my little bit about the sun. In terms of the moon is also a similar one, but it's a slightly larger dance, right? Because the moon doesn't actually physically change shape so that we see the full moon or the new moon or whatever it is in its waning or waxing cycle. The moon is moving around us, or rather we're orbiting each other, and then our position is also changing relative to the sun. And so that the way that the sun is shining on the moon relative to where we are changes what it looks like and how we see it. And so that builds back into what I was talking about before. And then there's something about the moon. There's so much more than I think we understand yet. There's a very deep connection that our species has with the cycle of the moon, because we are reproductively tied to, our hormonal cycles are tied to the cycle of the moon. And I think that's just a completely fascinating field, and it would be really interesting to look in find out more about that. I'm sure that there is some research out there as to the whys and the hows, but we have 28-day-ish hormonal cycles, whether you're male or female. It's a little bit more obvious for females, but that, and the moon is an almost 28-day cycle. At least it is in this period of history. So there's something very very deep, very primal, very deep in our genes relating to that, that has that relationship there. And that also reminds me, I wanted to touch on this just briefly, that often scientific understanding or scientific approaches are positioned as if they are at odds with spiritual understanding. And I don't think that that needs to be the case. For me, the more that I learn from a scientific approach, which is a beautiful, wonderful tool, the deeper the mysteries become for me, the more there is to learn, the broader it expands the awe. It doesn't make it dry and dull. It becomes even more colored, more spectacular. So I don't think that those two systems need to be considered odds or enemies. Now, I think this is a much longer video than I thought it was going to be, but it was definitely fun to share that with all of you. And next week, we have a pretty interesting topic coming up that is going to take a lot of time to figure out how to cover. So I look forward to seeing all of you next week, and until then, take care.